Hello and welcome to the next lesson in our little series here. So, today is the time where we actually start digging really into some good stuff here. So, before we're going to do that, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors because wanting to work on these things, it is really important to have proper environments, proper content to actually do all the things that we would like to do. So our first sponsor is Real Biomes, and it's this one here. So this is the exterior that we will be working with. Then we have Reno's Diner from Decagon Studios, which is used for the interior space that we have. We have Rosie's Restaurant/Diner from Solo Mode, which is the exterior that we use for the diner building. And then we also have the Desert Gas Station by Joachim Stigson. So huge shout out, big thanks to sponsoring this content for us to work with. And this is the scene here. So we have a really nice and big open environment to do as we please with. And we do have the two buildings down here. So we have the gas station with the car, and we do have the diner with the interior here. And right now, this is a little bit all over the place, which is to be expected because I did go in and just delete a bunch of things as well, mostly in terms of the lighting. So what we need to do is we need to just step by step start sort of rebuilding what we actually want here. But before we really worry about any of these interior spaces and all that, the first thing that we kind of need to do is we just really need to do what I call an analysis pass. So this is usually one of the most important things, and it will help you down the line to make sure that everything works in a consistent way. So one of the biggest tips in that sense that I can give to anybody is if you work with bought content, like marketplace content, or even with your own content, I think it's always really, really important before you start the actual lighting work to do a quick sanity check on everything. Make sure that everything is a clean base to start building on. And one thing that is really important in here, and we haven't really talked about this much before because we did the portfolio rendering stuff and all these kinds of things. However, working with a proper environment now, all these things become a lot more important. So what am I talking about here? So this has been really important with static baked lighting as well. It was not as important with dynamic lighting before in Unreal because Unreal did not really have real-time global illumination. However, now that we have it with Lumen, it changes the things quite drastically. And what I'm talking about here is diffuse color or base color balancing. Because we have to understand that based on the color an object has, the way it reflects the lighting, it varies a lot. And not only do we need to make sure that our materials are physically plausible, but we also need to make sure that we have enough range in our colors so we can sculpt the lighting nicely, and we also have some room for some potential color grading on top. And there is a bunch of things that are quite interesting. For example, there are, from a physically based rendering point of view, values that are just impossible. We call them physically impossible. And that is pure black and pure white. There is really nothing, and let's not start a discussion about Vanta Black here, but there is there's no real materials that are pure black or pure white. Like, even if you expose it correctly and if you measure it, like, even snow is not pure white. So snow is actually one of the whitest or materials that we know. One of the darkest is charcoal. And both of them are neither full black nor full white. So that is one important thing to know, because every material that we have in our life, it does reflect and bounce light. So if you make something in your game engine or wherever and you make it full black, it means that it bounces absolutely no light. And that is just not possible. And the same goes for white, which means it bounces like everything 100%, which also doesn't really happen. So that's one thing. But another thing, and then we can use the buffer visualization here and go into base color. Another thing is that you kind of want values to be really like balanced and mostly rather flat, because you want the lighting to add the variation and the spice and all that. And here, for example, this is quite great because we can see that overall everything is rather low contrast, but we do have a little bit of like the reds here, they pop quite well. But it is not super extreme. And if we look at this stuff here, we can also see that this is like everything is rather flat. And if we look at this texture information, it is rather flat. And to be honest, this is exactly what you want. Like here, like you don't want a million of detail in your base color textures. You kind of just want this to come from all the different texture maps that work together to create something good. Now you may say like, oh, but there's like quite some dark spots up here. And if I do remember correctly, this is actually wetness here. So I think there is some sort of like, yeah, we can see it. I think it's a little bit unfitting here to have this wetness. But the funny thing is, I'm not sure if you have seen it, but there is the Australia content in the marketplace. Just gonna pick this up here quickly. So it's this one. And this one is actually from a good friend of mine, Andrew. He used to be my art director on Star Wars. And he has these cliffs here. Like these cliffs. And he uses these wetness masks because there is a river and it like fits the environment and all that kind of stuff. And the funny thing is like this guy, he is really, really good at what he does. And this content pack is one of the best examples, and it's free, so that's great. It's one of the best examples how to balance your textures, how to set up content and all that, because this guy, he really knows how to do it. And it is a lot of these concepts that are in here is how we did things on Star Wars as well. And the funny thing is that I went through this environment, and the way that some of these objects are set up, the way that the textures are balanced, it is exactly how the rural Australia content has been built, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because that is sort of like how you should do it. It was just a little bit funny to me to see this, because like it's the same kind of wetness effect that Andrew had used in his stuff too. And I was like, when I saw it, I was like, okay, I know this. So coming back to the colors here, when you have something that is wet, the diffuse usually gets darkened. So that is why you have this more contrast here. And that is fine. But again, overall, everything is rather flat, and that is what you want to, because when Epic did the Valley of the Ancient stuff, they had a little production breakdown from it as well. And they said like that some of the Megascan textures, for example, they were not balanced as well as they could have been. So they actually had like issues where the GI, for example, was like too weak, or it wasn't like as saturated enough. So they had to revisit their content with the new technology available to make sure that it actually works and looks the way it does. So they had to fix it via texture balancing. And that is something that is just really important to know when you work with your lighting setups. You really want to make sure that your textures are all well balanced. Everything is like working the way it should, so that it works well. And just looking at this quickly again, I think this is great. This works well. There are some values that are on the darker side, but then again, they're also like rather dark materials. And one really good tip that I can give to everybody is, like, if you don't know, just basically take your textures, do like a quick like snip here, and then put them into Photoshop and use the histogram analysis to just see where you are. So in like this case here, for example, you know, just like take the snipping tool, snip it, copy it, and then like just go Photoshop. Paste this in, and now if you go here to the histogram, you just go to luminosity, and you can see that we have a mean of 212, median of 214, and that is rather bright, which this is. So this is something where we say like, yep, that's fine. So for darker stuff or like medium stuff, you kind of want to be around 100. This is not scientifically proven or anything. This is just something that, based on my experience, I have isolated as a decent value. So let's just have a look here. This is probably a bit on the darker side, but let's see what we get here. So this is 120, and this is great. This is absolutely great, because you have to see like 128 is sort of like medium gray. And personally, I balance a lot of my materials that are more on the darker side around like 100 to 110. So this is absolutely perfect, because it will give us a lot of bounce lighting. We have some decent saturation going on here. And the problem is that if you would download a material like this from Megascans, for example, like a lot of the times, not always, but a lot of the times, you kind of like get something like more like this. And you can see then we're like on 75. And 75 is really dark. It means that there will not be a lot of bounce from it and all those kind of things. So this is just something where I do like my sanity checks. And again, there will be a lot of materials that are potentially around like 85, 95. But I think like around 100 is usually the sweet spot for me, even though if a material seems rather dark. And I think this is quite interesting looking at this, because it does not look like super bright here either, right? So it feels dark in comparison to a lot of these, but it is not too dark, like by no means. And we have a good overall value. This one, probably different story. I would assume that it's more like around 80 or 70. So let's just see. But then again, these materials, like it's this like roof thingy that they have to like I think it has like tar in it or something as well. And they use like a burner to put it onto the roofs, I think. Are we? Am I gonna do this? Yeah. So here we like 97. So still very, very good. And for comparison, on Star Wars, the texture balancing for Darth Vader was 53 in the median. So if I put this here, you can see now we're at 60. And I'm just going to put this down a bit more. So this is basically the full black of Darth Vader. And it doesn't look full black in the texture, but we need to have some sort of information to have it represent properly. And then we also had like some decent tone mapping on top of it, so that is why he looks really nice and black. But so overall, we can say this is some working texture balancing here. Same goes for this. Like none of this is like really too dark here, so that's all right. I want to quickly check this value here, just so I can be sure in what kind of range we are here. And maybe we will look at it, alter it a bit. We'll see. So here again, so this is 110. This is great. So it really, like, sometimes our brain gets fooled by, in this case, the fact that everything else is so bright. So it's not necessarily that this is so dark, but all this stuff is just really bright. And that's okay. So we just need to double check, because again, like I said, our brains, they can get fooled by this, and then we just don't really know. So always good to double check. Now, with that sort of out of the way, what I would like to do is, like, I would like to just really do a clean slate for this. So I'm gonna clean this up and say, like, yep, I have really nothing in here, so I can do whatever I want to make this work. So let's go and check. And first of all, I will completely delete the post-process volume. Yeah, cool. So gonna get rid of the post-process volume here to make sure that there are no like settings that I don't like, or like basically saying this is quicker than going through the post-process volume and just like turning everything off that has been set before, or like something like that. Because like, I don't know. So let's make sure that this works the way it should. Then let's see what type of fog we have in here. So we do have an atmospheric fog, we have an exponential height fog. And for now, I'm just making sure that the atmospheric fog uses default settings here. And I will turn it off. And you can see how it has quite an effect, not only on the clarity of our skybox, but also just like everything sort of, it affects the colors. So we can see here, like if we turn it off, for example, right? Like our sky becomes a lot more blue, and the same happens to our GI as well. And when we do this, it like fades it a bit. So it does also have quite a significant effect here on our lighting. So I'm gonna turn this off. I have the exponential height fog here. We're using volumetric fog, not a lot is happening. And we're just gonna turn this off as well. And we can actually see that it is tweaked in a way here where there's not a lot happening. So again, just making sure we have a clean slate here. We go into our directional light. We are movable. We are on 9 lux because this project has not been set up to use physical values. However, I did set it to the EV100 stuff already, like the extended luminance range in the project settings. So it is set up in a way that we can start using physical values, which we will be doing. I'm gonna delete this though and just start all over. And then we have our sky here. And this is interesting. I'm gonna delete this here we have our skylight set to movable, capture scene. There's like some color set up here. Now it has recaptured with a black sky, so that is what is happening here. It's a bit interesting why we still have this glow. Very interesting. Oh, I think it was... No. Well, in any case, it will be fixed rather soon. So this is just like stuff where I sometimes don't know what is happening, because this was not like something that happened in Unreal 4. In Unreal 4, like because this seems to be like some still cached lighting from Lumen or something. So like you can see when I turn it off, it just really goes away. And when I turn it back on, it kind of like comes back. So, looking at this, let's see how we do this. So I have a material here, which is my Sky Master material. I will create an instance off screen for this. And then, classic move, as always, I will go into the engine content. I will type sphere. I will grab my editor sphere here. And then let's turn off all the shadow casting. I'm gonna apply my sky material here, and we can see beautiful emissive light source. And let's scale this to 15,000. And now we can see that we have this sort of thing here. And now what I need to do is I need to recapture my skylight. So we have something where the exposure starts matching, because we had our bottom information was almost black and we had the bright sky. So that is something to remember. So now we have this. And like I mentioned before, I really do like to just always start with my sky. And here we have a sun in here. So sometimes I actually put this into Photoshop and I edit the sun disk out, because this is a very strong light source as well. So like there is definitely a sort of like directionality from the light that is quite strong when we do this. So it can help to edit it out and then like use the atmospheric fog to basically render a sun disk on top of this. But again, there's like many ways to do this. I will just put this up here. And here we can see that we have this lower hemisphere color set. And I will make this black, just so we don't have any interference. And this does not really matter, because what this does is that basically none of this stuff from here, because like if I would turn it off, we would get this stuff as lighting information as well. I don't want anything to leak. And locally speaking, everything will get replaced with the local bounds anyways, because we have Lumen. Before we had Lumen, we could use this to fake bounce lighting and stuff like that. But we don't need to do that. So I just want that like all the lighting information from the bottom is sort of like erased to not cause any problems. So now I haven't really decided how I want to rotate this guy. And this depends a little bit because, as you can see, we do have a sun here. So the idea now would be to just bring in a sunlight, because what we need to do is we need to sort of make it aligned with the actual sun position here. We can have it like a little bit lower potentially, just a tiny little bit, but we still need to see from where it should come, and then we will rotate this guy accordingly to match it up. So let's get ourselves a sun here. Beautiful. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just seeing where the sun also would hit the interior. And I'm kind of curious about this glass here. Because it kind of seems almost like the sun is not really going into the building here, which could be something with the material setup or with the angle. So let's just see what happens here. Like I would love something that looks great outside, but also it would be kind of neat to get a little bit of lighting to like hit inside here. So we have something here, but like it's probably the angle still that is not yet fully there. So let's see here. Yeah. So it was still just shadow casting. But again, we can't really make it too low because our sun is not that low. So we need to sort of find like a bit of a compromise here. But I think I do kind of like this where we have a bit of it exposed. It's not all in shadow. And we are actually automatically pretty aligned with this. I think we would need to rotate it just a tiny little bit to the left, like a very tiny little bit. So what I'm using here now is I'm using the arrow from the sun actor to see how aligned it is. And we can see like if I basically center myself in a way where like this overlaps perfectly here, we can see that we are still a tiny little bit off here. So something more like this. I think this works. Looks good. So this is the first thing that we do, right? Just throw these in. And now what I want to do is I kind of want to balance this out really, really well. So you can see here that my brightness is 1, which is obviously not the physically plausible values that we usually go with. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go for the sphere again here. Drag the editor sphere in. And then let's see if I can find something for quick debugging. Yeah, let's use this one. It should be fine. All right, so now we have the gray material here, okay? And what I'm gonna do is, like, I'm gonna drag this out a bit because I don't wanna get too much like bounce light from the ground or something. I want this to be like, yeah, rather neutral. So now let's start this with the physical values quickly and just make a super basic setup for this. So this sun is, even though my shadows are not 12 o'clock, like this is, I don't know, maybe like 1:30 or something like that. It's a bit hard to say, but let's say it's like 1:30. So we like, and this is a desert environment, right? So we have a very strong sun here in a scenario like this. So if I go in here, actually set this to movable. And now with this set to movable, let's go down here. And let's say that we are at 100,000 lux. Now this happens, right? And we obviously get like a lot of issues here. So before we continue, let's just quickly add a post-process volume and just super quickly lock something in so it doesn't completely fall apart here. So do it infinite extend, go to exposure, have this set, and then like, I don't know, like 14 or something. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna show the visualize HDRI adaptation. And now we're gonna do the thing where we balance the stops. So we can see here we have 15, pretty much clean. And here we have like 9. And remember, when we looked at this, I said that you want to have 4:1 ratio sort of sun versus sky with a scenario like this. So that means that we need to sort of go to like 11 here. And to do that, I will bring out the instance. Oops. And now I'm just putting in something so I can see stuff here. And you can see this obviously still looks rather dark. And what we need to do now is I'm using this one here. It should be build reflection captures. And I think it actually did rebuild the sky, but let's continue here. So you can see now how the skylight has updated and we're like on 11.4. So we have 11.4 and we have 15.2 here. So I say that this is probably rather good in terms of balance. Oops, wrong one here. So let's go in here, turn that off. So now we have our first like balance set. However, I think we can still pump this a bit here. So what I would like to do is I would go into my post-process volume. And instead of changing these to 13, I'll just do this. And now we also get this like hot feeling back, all right? So we do have some really pleasing values, and we have a good ratio overall as well. So let's quickly look here. Whoops. All right. And I just want to make sure that we have the virtual shadow map turned on. Yes, good stuff. So now what we can do is we can actually, if you want the shadows to feather a bit more, we can do that via the source angle. So if we look at this here, you can see how the shadows get a bit softer. So kind of like this. I think this is nice. Yep, this works well. So now we kind of have our first basic, really super basic setup here done. And now what we can do is, I did not delete this, I will. And let's just bring in a basic height fog here. And now you can see that we get this darkening again. And this is, of course, because our fog itself is way too dark. So like the height fog is not physically accurate. It's like an additive color that is being added to the scene and all that. So this color is just, no matter what you like set it to, like even if I set it to white, like you don't really see it, because it's kind of like this is like the brightness from 0 to 1, but we are in a brightness that is like way, way, way higher, like hundreds or something, because of the physical values. So what we need to do is, like, let's say we want the fog to be like this color, and now we need to do like maybe 200 here. You see it just got brighter. Let's do 1000. So there we go. So here we start getting something. It sadly resets when we like touch these. So it's a bit annoying. And this is obviously, why did it? Okay, I have to hit enter first before it kind of respects it. So, not saying this is beautiful at all. We need to change this a bit. So now we can use the sliders here to actually affect this, and the brightness stays mostly the same here. So we can set up something here that works rather well. Maybe like this. Gives it a bit of like this dusty feeling. Let's not oversaturate it. That makes it look really weird. Just like a tiny little bit. Maybe like this. And this way we have our first way of setting this up. And this is just really the initial basic thing here. And from that on, we can then continue. And you can also see that with these values, it is very dark in here. And this is completely expected. This is totally normal. because we will need to define exposure zones for like these things where we have interior, exterior lighting mixed. So we're gonna start ironing out these kinks over time. So that's it for the basic initial setup in this session. Thank you so much for watching, and let's continue this with the next session and do a bit more polish on this, and also start having a look at the interior and different values there. So see you in the next lesson.